Hello and welcome to part 5 of our UI kit series. Now in this video we'll be looking at creating a reusable component for our UI kit. We're going to go through the full prop list of everything that it's going to need, from practicality to accessibility and to style, and including animations as well. So the component that we're going to be looking at today is the button component. So if we bring the UI kit over, this is the current state of the button component. It's got one variation. It currently has an icon in the middle that doesn't change. So there's a lot of things we need to change. So let's get started now. The first thing we can see when we go to the button component is that it's fairly simple. It's got some content that it's returning, and that's about it really. It's got the function type, and it's just a button component. So we need to take what's in here and improve it. And we need to make it accessible. We need to have it so that it's got several different options for colors and styling, and the content here is a bit smarter. So right off the bat we can see that we're using an icon here, so we probably need an option to say whether we want to use an icon or not. So I would probably say here, as just a comment to come back to, is that we need a prop to decide whether we use an icon or not. We want another prop for the icon. When I say prop, I mean properties of a component that we can pass on. So for example, the icon component has the icon name property, which you can pass in whichever icon you want. Similarly, we're going to do that to button, and we're going to pass in a whole bunch of properties that are going to make this really awesome and really reusable. So let's get started. First of all, let's add button props here, make it an object type, and then let's start passing some props. So obviously one of the first ones is color, and we'll make that an enum. So we'll say primary and secondary. So we only really want the primary and secondary colors showing up. So if I hover over color now, it just shows me two options. And the next thing we want to do is add a custom class name, but because it's optional, we want to have it as a type string, but we also want to have it as an optional prop so that this doesn't like scream if you don't include it. So after class name, we want to check if it's disabled or not. So they might have disabled styling for the button. So we'll set that to a Boolean. So just true or false, whether it is disabled or not. The same goes for inverted. So we want to check if it's got inverted styling. So for example, if we choose primary and it's a solid background, we might want it to just have a white background and just the border. So we invert the styling. So we make the background transparent or something like that. And this is for expanded. So if we want to say this is area expanded, whether this is controlling other buttons. So if it's controlling other buttons, we normally use the area expanded attribute to dictate what the state of it is. The same goes for area pressed. We'll just call it pressed. And that's to toggle the button, and it's toggle the state. Right, label. So we want the area label to show as well, and that's going to be a string. We also want some on-click functionality. So we want the onClick to return a function, and because it is a HTML button element, we want it to return the React synthetic event. Because of the way the shadow DOM works and the way it destroys and creates elements based on what's needed in the view, you kind of need React on your side for this. So we're going to use a React method called synthetic event to capture the event on the button. So when you add it, all you need to do is just make sure that it's imported from React. So that it's imported there, and that should be fine. We're going to do the same thing for on key down, which is for keyboard accessibility. So if we take this, put it down here, and that should be fine as well. So that's basically if you want to move around using your keyboard only and how you interact with it. We also want the tab index, and we'll have that as a number. So the tab index is basically the order in that the button can be tabbed to. If you do -1, it means it can't be tabbed to at all. But something like 0 means that it can be tabbed to. That's the most basic one. And then if you decide to set an order, you might have like 5 buttons and you want to do a custom order. So you could have 1 is 0, or 1 is 1, 1 is 2, 1 is 3, etc. But again, if you do -1, it means it can't be tabbed to. Obviously, the text, which we won't have as an optional. And in fact, we'll put that further up here, just with the non-optional ones, just so that we've got them all bunched together, and then all the optional ones are down here. Put tab index a bit higher up as well. Another optional one that's quite good is loading. So we're going to do a fun loading state for the button in a short while. Once we've got some of the basic stuff set up. But this is our props list for now. We might come across stuff that we haven't added yet, but this is essentially when you're making a reusable component, you kind of have to think of everything, because when you create a reusable component, they're going to be accessing the wrapper component function, which is the button. And when they do that, they then can't directly access and change and add attributes on the fly. You have to think about it beforehand and make sure that they have everything rather than coming back retroactively adding it, which is fine. It happens. That's natural in UI creation and UI development, but it's always good to try and think of as much of it as possible. With these optional props, it also means that the component doesn't scream every time you put it in, but you've got a base set of things that you do need. Okay, right. So I think that should be everything. Let's start adding some of these now. The first thing we want to do is obviously connect this up to button props. And then because this is TypeScript, we need to add it here as well. So now that this is all hooked up, we're going to destructure these props as well. So we're going to have const, and we're going to have an object, and we're going to start with the ones that aren't optional. And we'll go down the list as well, actually. Loading, class name, disabled, inverted, tab index, on click, on key down, and I believe that's it. And then we'll just make it equal to props. Oops. So, yep. Maybe now we'll set it as a capital R. Right. Let's start connecting these up. So that's the default class, which is fine, but because we're going to add multiple classes, we'll put a string literal here, and we'll add this back like that. So that'll be the default styling really for all of this. What else do we need? We're going to need primary and secondary class, so we will add color here. So what this will do is this will set whatever you choose here, whether it's primary or secondary, as the class here, as a CSS module. So that's that one taken care of. Now text is text down here. So all we literally need to do is put an object around it, and yeah, that'll access this text here and turn it into a variable. Cool, right, so that's that done. Then label, so we want to add aria label. So we'll go right after here and go aria label, and we'll make it equal to label. So now that this has an aria label, so it can be read by screen readers a bit better. Now the funny thing about a screen reader and aria label is that screen readers tend to go for whatever is in the element first, so like the text. So it goes to read the text. Now if there's no text, then it will start to read the aria label. That's generally how the screen reader works in terms of order. So what you put here is actually super important to accessibility, and so is the aria label as a fallback. But a lot of people seem to think that this is by default is what gets read, and it's quite weird, the order of things. So it's always worth researching when you're creating a component what's going to get read first, because obviously it matters when you create that. And for people who are sight impaired or might have some kind of disability, these things matter even more. So I would definitely look into it, and it's a big chunk of people who use the internet who would need these two. So we'll add loading last, so I'll leave that there for now. Class name is fairly straightforward. If we go here and we simply add class name, that'll add the custom class name for us. And then disabled. So for disabled, what we want to do, we want to have the disabled attribute here, and we are going to say if disabled is true, then we want that to return disabled. Otherwise, we want it to return false. So if we test that out and we set it to true, let me go take a look. Refresh that. So because there's no styling, yeah, we can see that it's disabled because I can't click it. If I was to add some styling for it, we could just improve how that looks as well. So we've got it actually disabling the button there, but we also want to add some styling to show that it is disabled as well. So let's actually put this on a new line, all of these, because it will start to get confusing after a while. So just here, we also want to add, oops, let's get this to go down as well. So we want to add CSS disabled. We need to add this for this as well. We just need to make sure we set proper defaults for these. So disabled, that's a Boolean, so we'll say that's just false for now. Oh, it's set to true. What's it saying here? Type Boolean cannot be used as an index type. Fair enough. So what we'll say is if disabled is true, we'll just return CSS disabled, and if it doesn't, then we'll return nothing. So we've got the disabled styling sorted, or the setup for it now. We just need to add some styling for it. Let's go to here and then go to disabled, and we'll just say opacity 0.4. So we want the not allowed cursor, so we'll put not allowed. So what this means is it's going to have a lower opacity, and when you hover over it, the icon is going to change the cursor icon. So let's go take a look. If we go to button, we can see that they're disabled now. If I go to the button stories and I set disabled true on this, and disabled, and we'll set disabled to be false by default, which it will be. And then we go take a look. We can see that that is now enabled, and that is the disabled styling. And let's just make this on hover so it shows. So when we try to hover over it, it shows the disabled icon properly now, and it shows the proper icon for this one. So we've got the disabled styling sorted. Let's have a look at the next bit. So inverted styling. So we want to invert the styling for the button. So similar to what we've just done for the disabled styling, we're just going to add a class name for that and then have that toggled. So we have inverted, and if it returns true, we'll just return CSS inverted. And if not, then we won't invert it. It'll just be solid. By default, we'll do the solid versions. Okay, so let's go take a look. Go to the button component. So with the inverted class, we want the background to be transparent and the border to remain the same. And I think that's really it. So if we go to stories and we want it to be inverted, we just simply leave it as that. And if we don't add any parameters to that prop, it will just return it as true. So if you refresh that, it should be returning button inverted, and it's setting the background to transparent. We know that that's working now. So let's add the stylings for these colors. So primary and secondary, which we forgot to add. So primary and secondary, because then this is the way we're going to be able to tell by background colors. So the background color is going to be color primary, and we're going to say the actual color of the font for now is going to be body, and we copy that, put that in here, and we'll say the background color for secondary is obviously going to be secondary, and we'll just keep that the same. Let's go take a look. So yeah, you can see that that obviously has a background color, and that's shown up without one because it's inverted and it's just showing the border. We do actually need to add a border to this. In fact, let's get rid of that, put that there, and we'll say border 2 pixels solid color primary, and we'll have that as color secondary. So that should be that, and then we'll add a bit of border radius, and we'll say about 5 pixels. In fact, let's just put this in the border styling up above. We don't need to repeat ourselves for no reason. Cool. Let's go check that out. So we've got that styled up there, and we've got that styled down there. So we can see now that the two background colors are different. That one's got a solid one, and it's got no border essentially because the border matches the color of the background. But this does have a border. Let's add a bit of padding as well. Let's add half spacing. So it does have a border. We'll add some base spacing on the sides, so the sides are a bit bigger. So if we go and change this now to not be inverted, it now returns back to its normal state. Let's just add another variation of inverted. Cool. Actually, maybe we'll have that up here. Change this to 3. Cool. Right, so we've got the inverted set up, we've got the colors set up. We actually need to sort out the icon. I just realized. So let's add icon here. Let's add icon name. We'll add that as a string. We'll pass that in here. You can tell these are we're starting to get a lot of props now. Icon name, we'll put that there. We also want to decide whether we show the icons or not. We'll do that in a moment. We'll just make sure that we add icon name to these. Actually, we'll have it. We want that as an optional, because if they decide they don't want icons at all, they're not going to need that. So we'll leave that as an optional one. But we'll add an icon name here, and we'll say for this one we'll use Chrome, and for this one we'll use IE, and for this one we'll use Opera. Right, okay, we forgot to add a default for this, so there we go. Right, so we've got all the icons showing. We probably want icon color as well. In truth, did I add a color prop for this? Yes, I did. So we want icon color as well. Now the icon color, I believe, is going to be an enum. So if we go to the icon here, no, it's not. It's just a string, where in actuality it should be an enum. Well, because we're setting it here, we'll decide on what we want it. So we'll create an enum here. So we'll say we want it to be primary. Well, essentially this. Let's just copy this. I also want to add the option of body. So we want it to be body colored. I also want to have it the option of being white, and I think that should be it. So in fact, we'll do the same here. So we'll leave that as that for now. We can always add different colors, but I think for icon colors it's important to have these options. Well, this is going to be passed in, so actually we do need to set it here. So that is going to change. That was a string before. That's going to be that. In fact, that's not going to make a big difference to this. Let's go into the stylings. So it's got colors. It's got body color here. We want white as well. I'm not sure if there is a white color. Let's go double check. Yeah, there is a white, so that's good. Okay, all the colors are set up for the icon. Let's go here. So we've got this enum set up with white body, secondary, primary. And then we just need to add the color here. So we say color, and all we do is we tie that up to icon color here. We'll set the default to white, and we'll just put icon color in there. So we've set the icon color to white there. But for some reason it's not showing up in the icon. Let's go have a look at the icon. Primary, secondary, body, white. How's that spelled there? So the same. Let's go have a look in icon.sas. Primary, secondary, body. That'll be why. We just did body. Cool. All right, refresh that. And now they're white. And let's change the secondary button color. Oops. Let's go into stories, icon name, and then we'll do, start to put these on another line now, start to get a bit cumbersome. We'll have icon color as well, and we'll set that to primary, or we'll set that to body actually. Do the same for this and this one. And we'll set the, just double check how it looks. Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, we'll leave it as that for now. We'll just add a little bit of styling for the icon. We've got icon here. I'm just going to add a class name actually for this, but I'm not going to add this as a prop. We'll just put CSS icon. In fact, I'll put button icon here. And then if I go to styling for button icon, and then what we say is we want there to be a bit of margin right, probably about half spacing. It might be too much half spacing, which is like 10 pixels. Let's go take a look. Yeah, it is a bit much. We'll chop that in half, divide that in half. Refresh that. Yeah, that's a lot better. That's a lot neater. I'm happier with that. Cool. Right. So let's move on. So the next thing on the list is we wanted to decide whether we show the icon or not. So we had, did we have a prop? We didn't. Let's put that in here. So let's put has icon. And we'll set that to a Boolean. I will add has icon here. And by default, we'll set it to false because we don't always want a button showing. And let's grab this. Oh, we've already put that down now. Let's go here. And what we want to say is, so we want to put it in curly brackets. We want to say if it has an icon, basically return that. And if it doesn't, it just won't return it at all. So let's go take a look and see how that looks. We don't want this as an optional, so actually we'll leave that as that. Actually, we don't mind having that as an optional. So as you can see, by default, we've switched it off everywhere. So the icon isn't going to show. But if we set it to true here, you can see that they all come back. So let's decide where we want to add it and where we want to keep it. We'll set it to false by default because we don't always want the icon to show. And the people that you pass this on to aren't always going to want it to show. So let's go to here and we'll go to has icon, I believe. And we'll say that on this first one, it's going to be true. In fact, you don't need to put that. Let's just add it in the places that we want it. So we'll add it on this last one, but we won't add it in the middle one. So if we go to button now, we can see that it's disabled. So it's only disabled the middle one. So there you go. What we might do actually is just add it here as well, just to show what it looks like, because that's showing the body color, and then maybe have it disabled here on the last one. Yeah, that's fine with me. Cool. So as far as I'm concerned, we've pretty much sorted out the icons. The only thing we haven't sorted out is the icon size. So we do want them to be able to choose what icon size they want to use. So let's have a look. Yep, size. So we want to pass it as a string. Yeah, we'll just put icon size as a string and we'll put it as an optional. Just put it like that for now. Let's go up here. Say it's a string, icon size. Let's go see, what was the default we set it to? Should we say large? We'll say small is the, we'll say medium is the default. Yeah, we'll say medium is the default. And I don't think that's actually the prop. I think it's just size. Yeah, so have a look. Medium is actually quite large. Maybe we should change it to small. Set the default to small. Yeah, that's a bit better. Yeah, I think I prefer that. Obviously, if they want to change it, they can do. They can change the icon size here. I actually don't like it as a string. I prefer it as an enum, to be honest. In fact, that's what I'm going to do. So we'll have it as small, medium, and large. And then we'll basically just copy this. And I'm going to put this in the icon as well, because that needs to be the same. Size, there we go. So that's going to be small, medium, and large. And that's going to make life a lot easier. Because when, for example, you hover over like size, for example, it's going to tell you really explicitly that it only accepts small, medium, or large, and it gives you the options there and then for you. So as you can see, as this is starting to grow, this is kind of the size of what a normal button component, what is relatively simple when you actually pass it on to other developers to use in a proper app. This is the kind of complexity that you start to get to, because you need to cater for a lot of things. Okay, so we've got the icons pretty much sorted. The loading we will tackle last. Class name, that's already been set, I believe. Yeah, so custom class name there. Disable, that's been set. Inverted, that's been set. Okay, so expanded, let's sort that out now. So we'll put that on a new line and we'll just go here. So area expanded, and we'll simply say that's equal to expanded, because it's going to return true or false. And then we're going to say area pressed, and this is whether it's toggled on or off, so it's kind of a bit like state, and we'll just put press down there. Cool. We just need to make sure that these are set to false actually. So pressed, I just want that set to false by default. Expanded, and I want that set to false by default. Awesome. So that's expanded and pressed. So let's move on to the tab index. Now this is going to be super important for deciding keyboard accessibility in which order the buttons you get to tab into. So we'll just set that to tab index for now. Have we got that here? Tab index, and we want to set that to default to 0. So 0 means obviously that it can be tabbed to. -1 would mean it can't be tabbed to. So that's up to the person who's working with this button component, what they want to do with it. It gives them full control. And lastly, before we go to loading, on click and on key down. So on click, simply we just pass the on click prop there, on key down. So that's all tied up now. So that's all connected to that. So on click is obviously if they click it, it does something. So for example, if I go to the stories and I go to the first one and I click on click, and what we want to say is we want to do an alert that says hello world. Go to the button components, and if I click this one, which I've set the on click to, we now have functionality for on click. So you can basically pass as a prop event functionality through on key down and on click now. So I mean, it's very quick, very simple. Cool. So on to the final bit now. We can actually delete this. Let's sort out the loading state. So we've got loading, I believe. So we haven't got loading actually set as a class name. So let's sort that out now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add our icon spinner. Now we could actually just create a loading component, which might actually be a bit more useful than this. So to create the loading animation, what we need to do is actually create a loading component, which is just going to have all of the styling and just everything contained in it, because it is something that we are going to want to reuse. So if I go to components and just create a new folder, type in loading, type in new file index.tsx, and create a new file loading.sas, and also loading.tsx. So if I go to loading and I click, we'll just build this out. Functional components. Add it as a React fragment for now. Export loading. I want to do the same here. Cool, so that's all hooked up. We also want CSS modules for this. So we want loading.sass, so that's all hooked up now to the Sass file. Cool, let's start building. Right, so we want to add the icon component. Let's make sure we import that. And then we're going to need some of the props. So we're looking for icon name. So the icon name is actually going to be spinner. So we want the spinner icon. We also want to add a custom class name, which is why we add custom class names, so we can reuse it in other components. So this is a perfect example for that. And we want it to have the class of loading. Let's go work on the loading class now. So I've added some styling for the loading animation. So we've just had a set width, set height. You probably want to have a CSS variable or somehow of controlling this, because if you choose the icon size and it's small, large, or whatever, you're going to have to basically change this to amend it. Or you could just keep it at 30, which is one of the largest icon sizes it can be. But it's a very simple animation. We're just rotating it and we're just adding a keyframe. So if you have a look now, this is what we can see. So if we go to the loading story, we just see our icon there, static, not doing anything. And the reason being is that it needs to be a div for React to animate it. So if I go here, so it needs to be a div for it to be animated. Currently, the icon font is set to the I element, which is the icon element. So we'll change that to div, go to the end here, change that to div as well. And in fact, I'll just going to bring this out just so it's easier to read, because it's starting to get a little difficult now. Okay, brilliant. So those are all the class names. Let's go take a look now. So if we go to the loading animation, boom, we can see that we've got a loading component working now. So let's go back and finish the button component. So let's close this down. So if we go here and we add the loading component, we can see we've not imported it. So we'll import that by default. Now, we kind of always want this to be animated and always want to be loading. You can obviously change the props on here. You can do whatever you want. You can go into real detail. Okay, we're not going to need that. Right, so we've got the animation loading. We've got that there. Let's go to button here. Now, similar to what we've done for icon, we also want to add a conditional rendering scenario for loading as well, because we don't want it to always load. So if we go here and we do this, and I believe the prop is just loading. Yeah, so loading. So if it's set to true, it's going to put the loading animation in there. 2 conditional renders. So we get to choose how our element is displayed depending on the options of the props passed. So let's go to our button components just to see how it looks. So you can see by default that it's loading for all of them, and that's fine. But what we want is, if the loading animation is there, we kind of want it to be on top of everything, and we want the styling behind to be then disabled. So let's add that logic in. Let's set the story. Let's just close all this down now. So we don't need loading anymore. If we go to button stories and we say that loading is true on the first one, and then we'll just say by default loading is false. Right, we're going to need to start putting these on new lines now, because it's starting to get a little crowded. You could in fact even reduce this further and just put this all on one line, but we won't for now. Loading, we'll set that to false. What we might want to do is we might want to add a loading color for the icon. So if we put color, in fact, let's go up here and we'll put loading color, and we'll set it to this enum here. And then if we go to loading, we will need to pass a prop. So let's add a prop here of loading. And we want it to be color. Set it to that enum. And then we'll put color here. And then we'll set that to color. We'll set this as a prop. So loading props. Let's make sure this is a lower prop. We just put loading props in here. Just destructure it. And we'll set it to props. And now that's connected. So now we can choose the color. We might as well set these up as well. So we'll do size. We don't need to set the icon name. Yeah, I think size is the only one we really need to do. Let's go grab that from here. And we'll put size in here. And as you saw that was set to large, we can simply do that here by setting this to large as well. Yep. So that should exactly be the same, but now they get to choose what they would like with it. So go back to button here. This is going to now have some requirements. So we're going to need to choose the color. And we'll set that to, what did we set that to? Loading color. And then we'll have loading size as well. So loading color and loading size. And we'll just need to pop these in here. So loading color by default we won't bother with. We will set that here, however. We'll set that to body. So it's always a particular type of color. We'll set body here as well. And we'll set this to large as well. Right, so we just also need to go here and add these props. In actuality, we don't really want these to totally dictate whether we can or we can't load the loading spinner. We just want them to be optional, and they can change them if they want, but by default it's going to be body and it's going to be large. Right, let's go take a look. So we've got the loading animation there. That's fine. Let's go to button and see how that looks. What we want to say is that this loading spinner basically is on top of all of this and isn't just placed up top, because right now it just seems a bit weird. So we kind of want this to look like it's disabled, like the button variation 3, and we just want this in front, so like position absolute or something like that. So let's go to button. We want to be able to style this in a custom way. So what we will need to do is actually add a class name. So we'll put this as spinner, and if we go to the loading here, we'll go class name optional string and class name. Put this on a new line. String literals. We'll add the existing one and then we'll add a new one, and we'll just set this to the prop class name. We'll put the class name here to destructure it, and by default we'll just leave it empty. Oops, there we go. So that's all connected now. Cool. Right, I don't think we're going to need loading again. I keep saying that, but I'm pretty sure that's it now. So now we've got this class here called spinner. Let's go to button.styling and add that here. And what we want to say is we want it to be position absolute, and then we want button to be position relative so it can contain it. So what happens is if you have a parent container with position relative and you have a child container with position absolute, it's basically like putting an animation in a box. It can't get out of that box, and it's just bouncing around within the container, the parent container, which has position relative. So it's a nice way of containing position absolute, so it's not just all over the page. So if we have a look at this again, we can see that it's still spinning around like normal. So let's make sure that we've changed the class name in the button story. So in the button story, we've set the class name to spinner. So, I see what we've done here. God damn it. Okay, so basically we were meant to set this just as class name. We didn't need to put CSS.className. That's a rookie mistake. Okay, so if we go back to button now, we can see that it is position absolute. We just need it to be a little bit more centered. So to position this in the center, we're just going to need to add a bit of styling. It's going to make sure that this is in the middle as much as it can be, as we see there. The next thing we need to do is just disable it. So let's do that. Close some of these down. Go to button. So if we are loading, we have this prop here, which kind of indicates whether it is or it isn't. And I feel like that should also control whether it has disabled styling or not. So right now, the way that we're enabling disable styling is through this class name here, which comes from this property. Now what we're saying is we also want to check whether it's loading as well. Because if it's checking whether it's loading or disabled, it means that we get to trigger it through two means instead of just one. We've set it to true on the top button here, and that is working perfectly. So it's saying it's loading. So if something is loading, we don't want the user to keep clicking it and keep triggering whatever caused it to load. So having it disabled is the perfect option. And you can see down here, this hasn't been set to loading. So we can click it, and it also hasn't been set to disabled. So that's fine. But this one has been set to disabled. So through these different variations, we can see all the different options we have now with buttons, including our loading animation. Now that we've created this reusable component, this essentially is the building blocks of building a UI kit. With this, you can start piling on all kinds of components that can be used and reshared and amended and tweaked on the fly. But you can also keep a particular default set of styling as well. And you can still have some control over what can be done and what can't be done. And that's the beauty of setting up your UI kit in this way. In the next video, we'll be looking to create a compound component. Now, a compound component is basically a few of these types of reusable components put together into one. And that's also something that happens quite a lot in a UI kit, and in just modern apps you end up using several components, stitching them together into a compound component and having a wrapper for it. So I hope that was useful. Stay tuned for the next video in the series, which will be compound components. But if you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. I've been Harry, and this has been Curious Byte.